Most people think of God as their loving Heavenly Father, and as such, we have expectations for Him as a loving Father, and rightfully so. God reveals Himself to us in His Word as a loving Heavenly Father. But isn't it also fair that we ask ourselves the question, do we have responsibilities as children of God? If God has responsibilities as a Heavenly Father, we expect Him to love us. What expectations does He have for us as His children? What responsibilities do we have? There is a passage in the book of Hebrews that addresses both of these issues. Both it tells us about the responsibilities of God as a loving Heavenly Father, the expectations that we should have for Him as a loving Father, and it also talks about our responsibilities as children of God as our loving Heavenly Father. I'm talking about Hebrews chapter 12, verses 4 through 12. I'm going to read those verses for you, at least the first 10 of those verses, and then I'm going to be using the translation by Eugene Peterson from the Message Bible. In this all-out match against sin, others have suffered far worse than you, to say nothing of what Jesus went through, all that bloodshed. So don't feel sorry for yourselves, or have you forgotten how good parents treat children, and that God regards you as His children? Let me just pause here, give you a little pretext or context for this passage. The writer here is assuming that Christians are suffering because of their relationship with Christ. They're suffering in this world, and that's what he refers to when Eugene Peterson here translates it an all-out match against sin. He talks about the sufferings of Jesus, and their sufferings in comparison are nothing. They've not yet shed their blood in this battle, in this war, in their suffering, in their trials. Amazingly, he says, the fact that they're suffering these trials, and perhaps not amazingly, it follows from what he assumes, their suffering and trials are not proof that God does not exist or that He doesn't love them, but in fact, it's just the opposite, that God is treating them as children. It's evidence, it's proof that they are children of God. Or have you forgotten how good parents treat children and that God regards you as His children? Let me read on. My dear child, don't shrug off God's discipline, but don't be crushed by it either. It's the child He loves that He disciplines. The child He embraces, He also corrects. God is educating you. That's why you must never drop out. He's treating you as dear children. This trouble you're in isn't punishment, it's training, the normal experience of children. Only irresponsible parents leave children to fend for themselves. Would you prefer an irresponsible God? We respect our own parents for training and not spoiling us. So why not embrace God's training so we can truly live? While we were children, our parents did what seemed best to them. But God is doing what is best for us, training us to live God's holy best. At the time, discipline isn't much fun. It always feels like it's going against the grain. Later, of course, it pays off handsomely. For it's the well-trained who find themselves mature in their relationship with God. Have you forgotten how good parents treat children and that God regards you as His children? That is an amazing truth. That is an amazing revelation of God. Do you realize what we're seeing here, what truths come through about God? God is incredibly personal. He is intimate. He's engaged in our lives. He's like a loving Heavenly Father. What's your reaction to that? When we read this, When you think about that, well, I think for many of us it's, so what? We take that for granted, but we shouldn't. God is not some cosmic consciousness. God is not a force. God is not a principle or a theory. God is not something in your imagination, something you've concocted, something you believe in, something that is truth for you. God is not an idol. God is not a clockmaker who created the universe and then went off to a corner of the universe and lets it run out. God is personal. God is intimate. God is engaged in your life as a good, loving, heavenly Father. Some people don't want that. Some people prefer a God who's just a force or an idol, a figment of their imagination, or a clockmaker who's off in the corner of the universe and who leaves them alone. But I think it's a wonderful revelation, and it's the truth. The psalmist experienced this awe of God when he wrote this. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. God is not only mindful of us, he's a loving Heavenly Father. So what does this passage tell us? It tells us that he is indeed a loving Father. He is like a responsible parent. And he treats us just as you would expect any responsible, loving parents to treat their children. That's normal behavior. What is normal behavior? That a loving father disciplines. He corrects. He educates. He trains. He allows things into his children's life. He brings things into their lives in order that they might mature in their relationship with him. That's normal, expected behavior of a loving, responsible parent. You see, God doesn't give us, as we would expect with a loving parent, what we want. He gives us what is best. He does not leave us to ourselves. He will not spoil us. He is not punishing us. I think it's wonderful how Eugene Peterson translates the one part of this passage when he says, would you prefer an irresponsible God? Would you prefer a God who gave you whatever you wanted? Suppose God came to you and said, whatever you pray, whatever you ask, I will give it to you. Would you want him to do that? Think about if God answered everything you ever prayed, gave you whatever you wanted. The world and your life would be very different than it is now, wouldn't it? Do you think you can concoct a better world than God? Do you think you can run your life better than God? Do you think you know what's best? Do you think you know better than the infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing, not bounded by time, not bounded by space, the creator of all the universe? Do you think you know better than he does? Do you want God to give you what you want or what is best? How thankful we should be that he is a loving, responsible Father who gives us what is best, not what we want. The writer says in the passage we're looking at, we respect our own parents for training and not spoiling us. So why not embrace God's training so we can truly live? The New International Version translation of some of these verses reads like this: Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. God's discipline in our lives, the trials, the suffering that we endure, that's not evidence that we're not children of God. The writer here says that just the contrary is true. It's evidence that we are true children of God. If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all.